Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Reputation Igniter podcast. Today, I'm really excited to introduce our guest, Brian Feenie. Thank you so much, Brian, for being on. I really appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks, Chris. Pleasure to be here.
Great. And the reason I brought Brian on is because he's going to teach us quite a bit about the importance and the process for implementation technology inside of your business, because I know that so many of my listeners out there right now are facing different technological challenges, and the implementation of those can be kind of daunting, but we know that we need to do that to continue to advance in our trades. And so real quick, before we kick off, please like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. And if you feel so inclined, please leave a review on one of these podcast platforms. It means the world to us, and it helps us get the message out to more and more of our listeners out there, you, the HVAC owners that are out there serving our communities. And again, the whole basis of this podcast really is to help highlight the amazing, incredible things that you guys are doing out there in your communities, bringing your zone of genius to bear onto this show so that you can share maybe a highlighted insight that you have, so that you can help your fellow brethren and sisters out there continue to improve their businesses so they can serve the communities that they're serving that much better, especially with mainstream media continuing to demonize all of us entrepreneurs as bloodthirsty, money-hungry people. We know that you're not that way, that you're just trying to put bread on the table for your family. You're trying to employ some of your fellow neighbors, and you're trying to serve your community as well as you are. So let's help you guys continue to grow and strive and do all that kind of stuff. And so without further ado, let's jump in. Brian, can you please tell me, why do you think it is oftentimes, there's so many of these businesses that have the best intentions to implement a new technology. And we could be as basic as like a CRM technology shift inside of a business and trying to go from like, I don't think anybody's still paper, but maybe there's somebody out there listening that's paper, probably not. We're going from like paper to paperless, right? People got the iPads, they got the technology on the trucks, right? But there's so much technology, things are advancing so fast. What have you seen as the keys to making sure that a business should be implementing these technologies properly? And what do you sort of see as maybe the arc of implementing, that's a tough one, say that a lot of times fast. Yeah. These technologies, what have you found is usually the best practices maybe that somebody should implement?
Well, Chris, that's a great point you bring up. I'll start with what I typically see. What I typically see is a lot of customers or companies struggle with actually getting things implemented in a timely manner. I think it stems a lot of times back to the reason they picked that technology or that software.
Sure.
A lot of times they're picking it because their friends are doing it, or that's what the cool kids are doing. And it's not always the best solution for that particular company. A lot of software companies do a really great job of doing a high pressure sales process, and getting people to say yes to something that they're not quite sure why they did. So that starts this wheel of motion that, gets some bumpy roads along the way. And then next thing you know, 3 months in, 6 months in, they're not any much further ahead than they thought they would be. So there's these limits to implementing. Part of it comes to accountability at the owner level or key management. And, the other part is you have to have alignment throughout the organization. Everybody that touches that software or uses that software or tools or whatever it might be in their business, everyone's got to understand why and what their role is in it. To take a top-down approach, it can sometimes be a pretty big disaster. And I think, there's a lack of folks in the industry there to help curate, what that path to success looks like with any technology, any digital transformation, we'll call it, that, people might say, oh, I want to do ServiceTitan. I'll say, okay, well, why? Why did you pick that? Well, that's what the big companies are doing. That doesn't mean that's the right fit. Whether it's a CRM, whether it's implementing smart products or digital processes to run their business, I always like to ask why. And because there's a lot of Facebook groups, there's a lot of influencers in our industry, which I appreciate them.
Yeah.
but it's not always why someone should make, a decision. They need a tour guide, so to speak. And so where the successful implementation comes, to that point of inflection, like you're asking, is when you have some ownership internally in the company. So assign an owner of the process or the implementation. Maybe you need an outside coach or an implementation coach to help, that will help kind of keep everyone accountable, keep a plan, on pace. But, I had a customer friend of mine runs about a $20 million company here in my area, and called me randomly on a Sunday afternoon and said, "Hey, I'm thinking of doing Service Titan." And same thing. I said, "Doug, why? Why that one? You have choices."
Yeah.
He's like, "Well, I think that's what everyone else is using. I got to do something." And he's like, "I have to hire all these IT people, and I have to do this." And I'm like, "Whoa, slow down." I said, "You need to have someone own it in the business, and maybe that's an opportunity for someone in the company that wants to kind of step up or rise to the occasion and show what they can really do. Maybe it's a promotion opportunity for someone in the business that understands the day-to-day operations and can make an impact on, how this works. Like it says, okay, well, I know the nuances of how we run our business today and how we built the monster of our own processes and how to navigate through. Now I have to adjust to the type of workflows and processes that the CRM, as an example, might force me to do. And so to get rid of the friction is really the important piece there. And I think you need someone on the inside to understand the balance. Because I spent some time at Service Titan, and when I would talk to customers, one of the challenges they would have is like, well, we don't do it that way.
Right.
And I was like, okay, well, I understand that, but these processes and workflows are built a specific way for a specific reason. Yeah. And there's documented success if you do it that way, follow those steps. And there's a lot of there's a lot of friction there, and I think setting the proper expectations, having someone to kind of be that curator to say, okay, well, just so you know, if you do this, these are some things that you're going to need to put into place. Because a lot of times what I see happen in technology in the HVAC industry is it's a sale. It's a transactional sale, and it's like, we're going to onboard you in an hour, and good luck. And and then you wonder why there's so much churn and why there's so much frustration. And I've met companies that have changed CRMs 3 times in 5 years. That's super disruptive, and it's really, something's broken in the process. It's not always the contractor's fault. A lot of times it's who got them there in the first place. And there just needs to be a better way, and I believe there is. But to answer that, long answer to that short question, but truly, there's a lot of variables, and you just have to look at it clearly, and really ask yourself, okay, why do we need to do it? What is what's the upside? How's it going to benefit the organization? And then prioritize. Because a lot of people want to do a lot of digital transformation in their business all at once. And, when I was leading a smart home product years ago, whenever I'd hear that they were trying to implement other technology at the same time, I would actually pull back and say, look, maybe it's not a good time to do ours. Because this other one is more important to the infrastructure of your business. So I'm going to kind of pause and, look at my sales opportunity as a delay, but it's the right thing, because you could essentially turn it right into a car crash if you say, yeah, do it all. Yeah, we're going to do it. Great idea, because you're doing it. You're motivated the wrong way. So I think it's really about being mindful of that whole process that people have to go through. And the issue is most small to medium sized companies don't always know what's in store.
Well, and I think to your point, is that like it's really it all hinges on this sale that somebody wants to make. They're motivated to do it, right? Now, that being said, usually it's well intentioned. There's good potential outcomes for it. Service Titan obviously is one that we've just been talking about, right? Like there's some real improvement that you could bring to your organization if implemented properly, right? But I think people oversimplify the implementation of a product or a service like that, right? Saying like, hey, it's just a 1 hour onboarding session. We'll just export your data from here, import it over there. I think anybody that deals in technology, like yourself and I, we know that it's not that easy because data is never that clean. But it sounds sexy and it's a nice little bullet on the website that says like, oh yeah, we can move you from Sarah to Service Titan or vice versa or whatever the case may be. And it's a lot more complicated than that. And I think one of the things is important to that, right? And you don't really bruise, anybody's, hopes, but just like asking that question, why? Because to your point, I can't tell you how many times, I just over the course of 10 years in marketing, like people will be like, I need to do TikTok ads. Okay. Why do you need to do TikTok ads? Because my buddy's running TikTok ads. Okay. Well, what business is your buddy in? Oh, he's a chiropractor. Okay. You're an HVAC business. What are you doing running TikTok ads? Like why? Right. Kind of thing. And it's like no, right? Like I never say no to a client, but I say, do you think that makes sense? Right. Like, and I think, like you said, you can get back to like, okay, well, maybe I'm just caught up in the excitement of potentially that, but getting to the root of, in the example, Doug's thing is like, there's something else there. There's a friction point in the business, or there's, a feeling of plateauing somewhere else. And the question is like, maybe there's a easier solution to solve maybe that sort of mental friction and drive maybe more excitement about the business or whatever, right? Like the feeling that we need to innovate. So I like that. So let's talk about that for a second though. If everybody's got a different why, whose job is it to educate, to instill that why? Is that something that like people come to a table and they kind of go, I need to find my why for our CRM transformation, right? Or is it like the owner's got to think through it? Okay, it's me, then I got my general manager, and then I've got, my staff, and then I've got to go talk to the techs, and then I've got to go talk to, or is this the program manager is in charge of this? Like, how do you typically see success in that realm of people understanding, finding, knowing their why so that the implementation can be a success? Because it never takes more than an hour to implement any technology these days.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point, Chris. I think, first of all, establishing that you have a project manager, that's key. Typically, you're going to see key stakeholders, key management team in the business. Yeah. They all want something out of it. So if you got to the point where everyone's at a table and saying, "Yep, we're gonna implement this software," great. Yeah. What do you want out of it? What do you want out of it? What do you want out of it? And then how do we curate that? Like, how do we get there in a reasonable amount of time so that we're not competing against ourselves?
Yeah.
Right. But also prioritizing the level of lift. There's going to be certain things for certain departments of a company that are easier to implement because maybe there is no process. So having one is great. Sure. Right. Yeah. Or there might be a more complex, on the data side, or trying to understand like, a lot of data entry pieces that have to happen with this, call a CRM implementation. There's different aspects of it that are heavier lifts. But the why part, I'm not sure if they're talking about their why now. Right. I think it's just like, we know we need to do it, and we don't have a way to track our metrics, or KPIs, or we don't know where we're winning or losing at any given moment of any given day. That in itself is a huge gain for a company, but they a lot of times don't realize like, are the numbers real? So I think like you can have a why, but let's take it a step further. Do I trust it? Sure. Right. So that builds skepticism of now, even though I understand why we're doing it, I'm not really sure if those numbers are right. And then there becomes this trust issue, and then dissension amongst the troops. Technicians, especially, they're usually last to know why anything.
Sure.
So they're just doing the least amount to get by a lot of times because it's not what they signed up for originally.
Yeah. I feel like, just an organization, like, I served in the United States Navy for quite a few years and then came out in corporate America. And, obviously now with my own business, to your point is that, the lower you are on the rung, right, or the totem pole, that like the less right? And so I just remember all the time, like how many times my guys would just be like, why are we doing this darn thing and this, that, and the other thing? And I go, well, did Chief not explain to you? No, he just told us we had to do this and we're here till 10 o'clock and all this other kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, well, guys, here's the bigger picture, right? Like we're gearing up for a deployment. This maintenance specifically is going to be done in a window that isn't opportune for our like you're saying, coming, and then they kind of calm down. And they go, oh, I can understand why this needs to be done now. Okay, cool. Like that's a failure on us. It's the chain of command, making sure that you understand that that's the case, right? So, do you find that it's good for the program manager to be the one sitting down, or do you think that there's better like ownership if it's program manager, maybe owner, like the key higher level stakeholders kind of sitting down and telling the techs? Because I'm with you, right? Like that's where you're going to get the most grumbling and the most dissension and arguably the most friction, right? Although you can have a key manager be a real boulder in the path, so to speak. But like, most of the grumbling and the longer term friction would come from the people that are actually maybe implementing the technology on the ground, or they're feeding into the technology, which is usually most of the case, right? To them, they're like, oh, this is just one more step that I got to do. And it's just because the fat cats at the top want more, better numbers to look at and yell at us for. So like what maybe if there's something, because I think like when I talk to my clients, like mostly that's where the friction comes from, is like, how do I get the guys and gals on the ground to really like understand that this is actually better for them? And here's why. What have maybe you found? Is there anything in particular that you've seen as a great way to kind of set that up or tee that up, so to speak?
Well, first, discussing, through the chain, like we were just talking about, is like one of the most important things. Like when you have the leaders of the company or key department heads saying, hey team, we are getting ready to do this. We feel it's great for the company, but it's also going to be great for you and great for our customers, right? You have to tie in every part of the experience, right? A technician typically, they want to do a good job for the customer. They might not always say it, but they do. They want to make a customer happy. Mm-hmm. If they can't understand how this makes the customer happy, they're automatically thinking, okay, you're just putting more work on me, and I'm less happy than I was when I walked into the room.
Yeah,
your project manager is the cheerleader, trying to keep everyone happy, right? And saying, yep, everyone's happy. I'm getting sentiment from the field. Field's doing well. Ownership saying great, because that's what I told them they need to do anyway. Because let's face it, the owner and leaders of these companies are the visionaries. They're the ones charting the course for the direction of the business. And there's folks to do more tactical work, where that project manager comes in, or department heads that have to make sure that, are we continuing to do the work, right?
Right.
And because it happens all too often, you've got leadership come in, we're going to do this. Look, this is great. We're, next level, everyone's going to make more money, all the buzzwords that they think people want to hear. They walk out of the room and those technicians say, I'm not doing that.
Right.
I personally worked in a home service company, for a while, and every great idea I ever had, because I didn't have the right alignment, would get sabotaged the minute I walked out of the room. And that still happens today in many businesses. I've coached a number of businesses, and that same thing exists today. Yeah. Even though they appear to be digitally savvy and doing the right work, they all struggle with, I can't get this implemented. Why do you think that is? And it's because of not connecting the dots all the way through to the homeowner, to the consumer, the one who's actually affording for everyone to still have a job, right?
Right.
So like that to me is kind of the key to that whole piece, is just there's a lot of balls in the air. There's a lot of people like working, but I think defining the roles of each person, maybe you have a champion in the service tech team or a couple of champions that are owners of the new thing, the new
Right.
process. And it's like, hey, you two, you're going to be the team lead of the service techs.
Yeah.
Well, we've never had that before. What does that mean? And so now I'm getting some peer interaction where
Mm-hmm.
they see that they're not just, outliers. They're becoming part of the solution. And I think that that's an important way to pursue it, in each department. Customer service team, have a champion in the customer service team, dispatch team, sales team, having little champions within, an implementation. I feel it's a very important way to get that mapped out.
Yeah. I mean, I think, like you said, having ownership at all the different levels, but like communicating it through the frame of the customer, right? And I mean, I guess I would be hard pressed to find something that you're implementing in the business that would really have no connection or touch point to the customer, right? And it's really just about you. And I won't even say getting creative, but just getting intentional, right? About that why, and pulling it back to the customer, because like that's the other thing is like, yes, if it's like, well, the owner wants to do this, well, yeah, you're going to get resistance, right? But you as the owner, if you want to do something, it's probably for a reason, right? Even if you're changing CRMs, it's like for some reason we don't seem to have a good enough customer history of what's going on with the customer, and we keep making the same errors on phone calls where we keep calling them up and we don't have access to the history, or we've got duplicate content attacks or whatever the case may be, right? Now that might actually be more of like a system process, issue than it is actually your CRM. But that aside, to your point, if you can communicate it to a tech that like, hey, this is what we're hearing back, through the dispatcher, from the customers, through our reviews, in surveys, like, and on happy calls, right? Like whatever you're doing to solicit feedback from your customers, if you're hearing the same things, you got to change that, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a great way to go back. Would you say, and last time we'll kind of like touch on this, do you think it's important in that conversation that you're having maybe with a sales tech or a service tech, right? And you're talking about why we're implementing this. Hey, the customer's saying this, that, and the other thing. Do you think it's important to solicit any feedback from the service tech to amplify buy-in from them? For example, like, hey, this, that, and the other thing, we've heard actually from a couple of you guys that this is an issue with the customer. We're trying to solve that. Like now that we've kind of got a little bit of an open forum on this, what other kind of issues, maybe pertaining to this are you seeing? Like, do you think that it's good? Like, because I would imagine having a one-way conversation never really goes as well as one would anticipate it, right? So do you typically, is that a bit of a back and forth, like, or is that what you kind of recommend or you see implemented often?
I mean, most importantly, service technicians want to be heard.
Sure.
And a lot of times they're not heard, whether it's product related, or anything in a business, anything that they have to interact with. If they don't feel like they're being heard, they stop talking.
Yeah.
And so they could be some of the best advocates for things you want to implement. They could also be, some of the best sources of feedback to understand, because they are the ones that are customer facing the most. And they're also the ones that are beat up the most.
Sure.
By an upset customer, right? And they're the hero of the day, but they also take the worst beating, because if that customer is in a bad mood, they tend to take it out on that service tech who's in the home that day. Yeah. And it's not fair to them to have to go through that. So part of what I think makes that possible, though, Chris, is the culture of the company has to warrant that type of open communication. So, if the culture is not aligned with open communication, it doesn't matter what you ask them, they're not going to tell you anything, because it's just, it's not what the company, stands for. So if someone's kind of battling with that, that's saying, well, I ask my guys all the time and they just don't tell me anything. Well, what's the culture of the company? Like, look within.
Yeah.
Like, it's a mirror moment that I would call it, and say,
Mm-hmm.
do you really have an open communication policy? Do your
Yeah.
technicians, do all the employees feel comfortable that they can interact with leadership and really tell them what's on their mind?
Yep.
And instead of waiting for a bad review to come through on a Google review, and
Sure.
then all of a sudden be pointing fingers. Well, how did this happen? This is a surprise to me. It should
Right.
never be a surprise, right?
Yep.
So yeah, I think the answer to that is it's really going to come back to the company culture,
Sure.
which affects everything we just talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, almost the speed of any implementation for something. So, what are your thoughts? And this is just an errant thought, right? Is your techs are the ones in the field. I would imagine that they are pretty resourceful people, right? At least the ones that I've met. They're probably trying to find out solutions to the problems that they're facing on a regular basis. And they've probably maybe got some hacks, some tricks, some tips or whatever that they're already using. Like, how frequently have you found that, for instance, your buddy Doug, he wants to do Service Titan because he hears all his buddies are doing Service Titan, right? But how often do you hear maybe from a service tech who's like, yeah, actually I've been kind of playing around with Measure Quick. And I think this would actually be a good thing for us to implement throughout the company, right? Do you find the flow of information? Obviously it depends on the culture of the organization, but how often do you find maybe owners going out to the service techs and going hey, do you guys have any ideas for solutions? Because you're the ones in the field. Because I think that's the other piece is sometimes the technology can look really sexy on a website, but implementation is really terrible. Sometimes it can be implementation is a breeze. The website is absolutely terrible. So what's kind of your thoughts on sort of a process for, separating the wheat from the chaff when it comes to that?
Yeah. I mean, I would encourage the idea flow.
Yeah.
First of all, just as part of the culture of the company, be hey, I want new ideas, right?
Yeah.
If you find that there's a resource that's better, or a technology that's better for the company, bring it to this the technician meeting or the sales meeting, so that everyone understands. Okay, no idea is a bad one, right?
Right.
So everyone could bring one that no one's feelings are going to get hurt, no one's going to be embarrassed. But when you're looking past the bad website, or this looks like it would be a piece of cake, it usually isn't, right? I would always encourage everyone to go through a discovery call or a demo. If you're curious about a software platform or some type of technological device, smart device, whatever, training's free. Demos are free, right? It's maybe a half hour to 45 minutes of your life, but that could be some of the most impactful time of your life, because you could stumble across something that could be game changing for your business. A lot of what I talk about with companies on a daily basis is the effect callbacks have on their business. A lot of company owners don't know what their callback percentage is as a percent of revenue. And I did a breakout session at Brian Orr's conference, the HVAC symposium down in Orlando a few weeks ago, and I asked a room full of people, and I said, who tracks callbacks? Maybe a quarter of the room raised their hand. And then I asked, well, does anyone know what their callback percentage is? Same crickets, right?
Yeah.
And I started to put some examples on the screen, and one of them, the math added up to about $100,000 impact to the business.
Wow.
So that's a couple employees. So if you're trying to grow your business and you don't, now why do I tell you this story? It's mainly because there are companies that are doing things to help correct that in a business.
Yeah.
And if the messaging is saying it, you should probably go on a demo for it. You should probably learn of, well, what's out there.
Right.
And then you got to hope that you're talking to someone that's really going to set the proper expectation of, yep, it is hard. Okay.
Yeah.
It's likely going to take you 6 months to implement.
Right.
Because you have to take your sales hat off and you have to bring on the reality of, what we were just talking about. You can sell it all day long and you can get people saying, wow, this is amazing. I can't wait to get started. And, I deal with this now. They say all the right things. I set the right expectations, but you know what? 90 days later, they haven't done a thing.
Right.
And I'm the first call they get and I'm saying, what's going on? You said you were going to do this. Help me understand. How can I help you?
Yeah.
Right. It's not their fault. There's probably a distraction of the day because it's what happens in the HVAC industry. There's always distractions. But, to that question of, the guidance of what's good, what's bad.
Right.
Look at them all, because it could hit the right note. It's just, what's your appetite for change? That's the first question I ask anyone that I talk to about onboarding technology. What's your appetite for change in the company?
Yeah.
And most times, like, oh, it's usually hard. Okay, maybe you shouldn't do it. Or, okay, if you really want to do it, here's the prescription.
Yep.
This is how I would prescribe you go about it, and what timelines to expect, and who needs to be involved. Like, essentially curating the experience for them. But then you've got others that are like, oh, we're all about change and innovation.
Yeah.
Great. When do you want to start? But still, here's the expectations.
Right.
But yeah, summarize, basically, be curious, look at everything out there. There's a ton of technology hitting our industry right now.
Yeah.
Which can cause confusion.
Sure.
Which I think is kind of where you were leading it. It's like, oh, well, there's so much now. Yep. Which is the right ones? And I think finding trusted advisors, 100%. People like myself, I feel like, to me, it's very important to try to help people, whether what I have helps them or if there's better things that are suitable for them, I'll help them get there. But it's really about just be curious. The industry is changing rapidly, more than we've ever seen. Especially in my 30 years, it's flying. So be curious, look into all of it, if it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, and through exposing yourself to what's available, you really start to hone in on what it is you truly actually want, right?
Yeah.
Because I think, and like you said, having a trusted advisor like yourself who's product or platform agnostic, right, I think is an important piece, right? Because like if you're talking to your service titan, tech, right, like they're probably pretty motivated to sell you on that platform, right? And I think that's why it's so important to surround yourself by people that are truly like resources to you, right, beyond just whatever specific thing that they're doing, right? And that's that's just one thing that I always kind of come to my clients with, and I'm like, hey, yes, we do your marketing and your reviews and your Google business ranking, right? But like, outside of that, you need a web developer. I know a really great guy. I've been working for years, right? If you need to implement some new technology, like, don't go that alone. Like, you need somebody like Brian, right? And just, making sure that you're kind of building out your own board of advisors. Like, that's not just for your HVAC company, but that is for all these different resources that you could potentially have.
And I think, like, to add to that, no one's really looked for that, for this type of thing in our industry. Like,
right.
No one's really realizing that they need an advisor to get through this technological change or digital transformation in their business. It's never been this complicated.
That too.
And there's never been as many options. And like, sure, I've got some brands that I'm aligned with, but if it's not the right fit for the client, it's okay. Yeah. And it's not about me when it comes to that. It's about them and like helping steer them. Like I mentioned before, I might say, hey, it's probably not a fit.
Yeah.
I'll talk myself out of the sale. I'll talk them out of the sale because we'll find that it's not the right thing. And I think that's really what I believe in as far as being genuine and sincere, is to say, these are people's businesses that we're dealing with.
Right.
That is putting food on their table, and they've got all of it on the line. you don't need a selfish salesperson to try to fit a square peg in a round hole. And I think that's, I guess, the words of caution or wisdom that I could help, provide folks is, one, be curious, find someone you can trust to help guide you, and know that it's okay that what you think you need might not make sense.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love that. I appreciate that too. First of all, our industry is so small. Although it is very large, it is also very small. So word travels fast. And I've had prospective clients come to me and I go, you don't need my services. You're doing fine. Like, don't spend the money. Just go spend that money somewhere else, or go take a vacation, or whatever the case may be. Right. And for me, it's like, rounding out 11 years in business is like, that's what lets me sleep at night. And like, that to me is far more important than, a couple more bucks in the bank account. So I always appreciate when I meet somebody like yourself, Brian, who has that interest at heart. And like you said, I mean, we those are the cogs of the economy machine that are moving forward. Right. And so anything we can do to lubricate and not to rust them out, I think is a very, very important piece. And it starts, on that one-to-one basis. So, all right, Brian, let's kind of wrap this up with this question then. You just talked about, the first kind of question that you ask people, right? What would you say are some additional questions that somebody maybe should kind of work themselves through when they're evaluating potentially implementing a new technology, or feeling the implication, the impetus to kind of start looking into a technology? And you had mentioned that, like, you have coached people, when you were in a sales position, to like, hey, let's delay what we're doing. How do you help somebody? I mean, and, just in maybe a couple of minutes, like, what would you say is like your cheat sheet to kind of identifying like which technology should you take on first? Because you probably shouldn't take on multiple technologies at once. Although digital transformation sounds really sexy, what should somebody do to be a little bit more sort of practical, pragmatic,
intentional?
Intentional about that.
First, what can have a high impact on the customer experience?
Okay.
Right. Any technology I've ever worked in and helped contractors implement, it's all come down to one common theme: having a meaningful connection with my customer. So meaningful connection. Does this check that box off? And then, what bandwidth do I have is the second quick question. Who can own this in the company? Is that an owner task? Is it a sales leader task? Is it a service manager task? If they have the capacity to do it, who's going to do it? If there's no ownership, it's just an idea. Right? If I'm not doing it to create more of a meaningful connection with my customer, it's probably not the right thing to look at, unless there's some underlying piece of it that is critical to the profitability of the company or the way the company runs.
Sure. Yeah.
Those are operational things. But yeah, that's, in a short order, it's first, how's it impact the customer? And then who's going to own it?
I love it. Sometimes the best answers are the simplest ones, like you're talking about. And, I think at the end of the day, you're always going to make a good decision if it is aligned with serving your customers better, right? Yeah. Like making whatever, their interactions, their communication, the information, the education, the data, whatever you can do to support that, you're never going to go wrong, because that's just going to continue to feed into your brand, right? And your brand is going to be the thing that continues to precede you. Those things, like you said, everybody pretty much has access to the same type of products out there these days, right? Like, it's long gone are the days where it's a local manufacturer and, you go with the local guy, like you can get it shipped from wherever, whenever you want, right? So now really the differentiator, and this is what I talk about all the time, is like, it's the customer experience. And so what are you doing to elevate that customer experience beyond your competitor? And I think a lot of people too, and this is another thing that I'm always pushing, is like, it doesn't end when you swipe your customer's credit card. Like, that's the other pieces. They think like, hey, that sale, that was it. We did it. Yeah. Woohoo. Everybody's high-fiving. It's like, well, no, and you hear more and more people talking about LTV, the lifetime value of the customer. And that increases when you make investments into the customer. And that's what you're saying. These technologies are investments, and there's so many different facets. So,
well, I mean, Chris, one other thing, you're in the business of reputation management, right?
Yeah.
You're helping these companies. So, that service after the sale, every impact, everything that they do, will impact that eventually. And, the unfortunate part of our industry too, with a lot of innovation, is there's a lot of shiny toy syndrome too. And,
yes.
And probably a lot of contractors that'll listen to this, recording, have all been burned by something, some software, it sounded great, looked great, but man, their support was horrible, or they dropped the ball on this. And sometimes those are hard lessons to learn, and you try to avoid them, and you follow the pack a little bit. Yeah. But again, it's even more important to have that that unbiased tour guide, right? Someone that's going to say, well, hey, first of all, let's look at them together, right?
Yeah.
Would you ever think of having a friendly, be on a demo with you that's really has nothing in it for them, but to be an extra set of ears and eyes to say, hey, here's my takeaway. Is that what you heard too? And then it's like, no, I actually saw this differently. Okay, well, let's talk about it. There's mentorship out there. If you don't have a mentor, get one.
Yeah, right.
or at least make sure that mentor knows that they are your mentor.
Yeah.
The other, or find someone that's there and has purpose and exists to help. And those there's a few of us out there that want to do that. And but yeah, there's a great road ahead.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Indeed. Well, I love the optimistic end note there. So, Brian, I know you're putting together a tool that's like, what tools, could and should you kind of use, right? And kind of understanding, what all is available out there. What, if somebody wants to get a hold of you, wants access to this thing, what's the best way to kind of reach out to you, to connect with you, to learn more, and maybe have you be that trusted advisor to them?
Sure. Well, my website is Shift Logic Sales. So just as it sounds, it's shiftlogicsales.com. If you're on LinkedIn, connect with me. Love to be connected with you on LinkedIn. Those are two of the best ways to get in touch with me. Certainly there to help. Yeah, I've got a ton of digital partnerships that I feel are, I've handpicked those tools and softwares because I feel that they do bring a ton of value to the contractor's customer, just like we talked about. But they're not for everyone, right?
Yeah.
But more importantly, outside of that, I do offer that implementation and mentorship through these types of scenarios that we talked about. So it's very easy once you're on my website to book on my calendar, grab a quick 30 minutes. Let's just get to know each other. No obligation. It's not a sales pitch. It's just I'm there to serve the industry. Been doing this a long time, and just want to give back.
Love it. Thank you so much, Brian, for being on. I really appreciate it. Again, you guys, if you haven't done so already, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, write a review if you feel so inclined, so we can continue to get this out to more HVAC contractors like yourself. Thank you so much for watching. We are super excited to just continue to bring you awesome leaders in the industry. As you know, everybody on this podcast is by referral only. So somebody has vouched for your guest or these guests, and we're just trying to keep it strong here, and good quality information and wisdom headed your way. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you